just looking at all the leaves at the bottom of our tree here, it looks like a normal leaf drop for the fall. But we're actually taping this segment the end of June, just after we've had all of those rains for 3 or 4 or 5 consecutive weeks. And when we first saw the leaf drop, which actually has been going on now for about 2 or 3 weeks, we thought it was probably a repercussion of that early freeze we had back in November. If you'll remember, we showed you how to check some of the trees during the winter at the ground level to see how severely damaged they were from that freeze. And some of our trees did have significant damage on the cambium layer. And a report from Dr. Kat Taylor, our extension fruit specialist, tells us that a lot of trees across the state are dropping leaves as a result of the freeze. And what happened was they were severely damaged, but enough carbohydrates were still stored in the tree that they were able to go ahead and put out a flush of growth. And now that those carbohydrates are used up, they're starting to drop leaves and the tree's dying. But if you look closely at ours, you'll actually see some spots that are occurring on the foliage, and they start out just a yellowish speck, then they get redder in the center, and as they progress, the centers will actually fall out of the spots, and it looks like a shot hole appearance, like BBs or something have been shot there, and it's actually called bacterial leaf spot. So in a good way, we're pleased that that's the problem, that they're not dying from the freeze, but at the same time, this is still severe enough that it will have repercussions on the tree. Now again, this isn't a fungus, and Alan has been really religious in spraying our orchard this year to try to get things under control. But we managed to omit a bacteria or a product that would control the bacterial leaf spot. And so as a result of all the moisture, it's just the prime conditions. So what's happening is after the severity of the leaf spot increases and the holes fall out, the foliage will then start dropping on the ground. Now, if we would have had a normal fruit crop, that would have impacted the size of our fruit, plus it does stress the tree considerably. And because of the moisture problems we've had this year, and as long as it's been going, we have started adding a fungicide to the spray schedule that controls this particular problem. And some of those are using either Coside or tribasic copper sulfate or MycoShield, which is a terramycin formulation. So any of those chemicals will work for bacterial leaf spot. Now your regular Captan and some of the other fruit sprays doesn't do any good on this particular problem. Again, it's a bacteria and not a fungus. So if you are seeing leaf drop and the foliage looks like they're pretty clean and you don't see any of the spots, it could be as a result of that freeze. But in our case, it's from the bacterial leaf spot here on peaches. Now all of this moisture and all the rainfall and cool temperatures are also playing havoc on some of our other crops in the gardens. Let me take you over here and show you what's happening to our potatoes. Now on our potatoes in this raised bed, we actually have 2 different varieties. The one on this half of the bed you can see is most infected with the disease that's causing spots and actually defoliating, and the vines are falling over. Now the positive thing about this is, again, this particular variety is Yukon Gold, and it's one of the heirloom varieties that we're trying. But it is an early maturing variety, so really we will be digging potatoes just any time. Probably we'll have them dug by the time this segment airs. But after close inspection of the foliage, we definitely know that it is a disease because of the spotting within the actual veinage of the foliage. It's not insects, they're not being chewed on, and we have plenty of Colorado potato beetles, but again, they chew on the foliage. We have it narrowed down to either early or late blight, and the symptomology is very similar, and we could take the foliage and send it into our diagnostic lab, and you can do the same thing through your county extension office. Of course, there's a small fee to cover some of the expenses and costs to get it positively identified, but we know that both of those diseases are controlled by the same product, so that's a nice thing to know, and those products would be either Bravo, Dithane, Deuter, and there's several things, and again, There's plenty of supportive information to help you in deciding what product to use. But because our potatoes are so close to being harvested, we're not going to treat them because the vines would be falling over anyway. And as wet as it is and as early maturing as they are, we're going to go ahead and dig them without spraying. However, we have started spraying our other 3 varieties because they're still several days to weeks away before they'll be maturing, and we don't want the foliage to die down on us too quickly, so we can still size up the tubers. So we have started spraying some of our other ones where we'll be harvesting this one. So we've talked about diseases in our fruit orchard and our vegetables. We're also seeing them show up on some ornamentals. And come this way and I'll show you how those look. Probably one of the most common and expected diseases that would be showing up in the landscape and garden this time of year, especially as a result of all the rains we had back in June and May, is the common fungus disease, powdery mildew. Now it's very typical. It grows right on the surface of the foliage in a whitish cast or hue, and we see it a lot of times on roses, but in our gardens we seem to have more of a problem with some of our cucurbits because of our overhead watering. Even later on into the summer, we've seen it on pumpkins and some of our fall squash and even our summer squash, and it can be so devastating that the foliage will actually burn and eventually defoliate or just dry up. So it does have an impact on the growth of the plants. Now, one of the plants that we've just gotten into the gardens that we've transplanted for some of our container gardening is a little ground cover type crepe myrtle. And boy, they are really eaten up with the powdery mildew to the point that the leaves are starting to turn brown and curl, and you can see some right here. And again, it's usually very superficial. It will wipe right off, but it distorts the foliage and it blocks out some of the photosynthesis, and it does affect the foliage to the point that even the new growth coming out is very susceptible. So because this is kind of a specialty plant, we will be treating it with like Funginex products that we use on the roses, or you can use benylate or benamil, daconil. There's several fungicides labeled for powdery mildew on various crops. Now, we've been talking about the various diseases showing up in our ornamentals, vegetables, and fruits. I really encourage you, even though it's probably starting to dry out a little bit for you, to be sure and keep on the lookout, because a lot of these diseases will continue to grow and affect the foliage even into the summer until it gets extremely dry, both humidity and moisture-wise. And if you have some concerns about the diseases we've talked about, all 3 of them are available in fact sheets at your county extension office. You can find one on the bacterial leaf spot of peaches, and it's fact sheet number 7641. There's also one on Irish potato diseases with some great pictures, and it's fact sheet 7635. And then there is one on the powdery mildew too, which is 7617. So don't forget to stop by your extension office, and if you can't get by there, don't forget your local garden centers and nurseries have a lot of good support material for these type problems too.